August 17th, 1943. 26,000 ft above Schweinfurt, Germany. The temperature inside the B-17F Lady Luck hovered at -40 degrees as Lieutenant Thomas Harrington squinted through frosted oxygen mask goggles. The formation of flying fortresses stretched before and behind him, aluminum silhouettes against the stratospheric blue. 60 bombers had already fallen from their ranks since crossing into German airspace. "Bandits, 3 o'clock high," crackled over the intercom as navigator Jack Wilson spotted the first wave of Messerschmitt Bf-109s diving through the sparse cloud cover. Harrington's gloved hand tightened on the control yoke, though he knew there was nothing to do but maintain formation. The B-17 wasn't built for evasive action. It was designed to absorb punishment, to deliver its payload regardless of opposition, and, if the engineers at Boeing had calculated correctly, to bring its 10-man crew home afterward. Staff Sergeant Elmer Davis swung his .50 caliber Browning in the ball turret beneath the aircraft's belly, tracking the approaching fighters. At 21, the Oklahoma farm boy had never left his home state before the war. Now he hung suspended in a transparent bubble miles above a foreign country, separated from the stratosphere by a quarter-inch of plexiglass. What none of the men aboard Lady Luck knew in that moment, what they couldn't have comprehended even if told, was that they were flying their first mission in what would become the most improbable statistical anomaly of the air war over Europe. While 77% of 8th Air Force bomber crews would be killed, captured, or wounded before completing their tour, these 10 men would somehow survive 25 combat missions together. The mathematics of survival were already working against them. The average bomber crew in 1943 completed just 8 missions before loss. The cold calculations of probability gave them less than a 4% chance of reaching 25 missions intact. The path between this first mission and their last would rewrite everything they understood about luck, skill, and the razor-thin margins that separated the living from the dead in the skies over Nazi Germany. November 2nd, 1942. Walla Walla Army Air Base, Washington. Second Lieutenant Thomas Harrington stood in the pre-dawn chill, staring at the massive silhouette that would determine whether he lived or died in the coming year. The B-17F Flying Fortress loomed in the darkness, its 50,000 pounds of aluminum, steel, and firepower waiting for the crew that would bring it to life. "She's all yours, Lieutenant," the crew chief said, handing over the logbook. "Fresh from Boeing, not a scratch on her." Harrington nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. At 24, the former college engineering student from Massachusetts had already accumulated 320 flight hours in training aircraft. But nothing had prepared him for the responsibility of commanding a heavy bomber and the 9 men who would fly with him. Behind him, the other 9 members of his newly formed crew approached through the darkness. They had been thrown together just 3 weeks earlier, strangers united only by the silver wings on their chests and the knowledge that they would soon be flying combat missions over Nazi-occupied Europe. Co-pilot Robert "Bobby" Sullivan, 23, a former bank teller from Chicago with a perpetual grin that masked the fact he'd washed out of fighter training. Navigator Jack Wilson, 25, a quiet mathematics teacher from Portland, who could calculate drift angles in his head faster than most men could write them down. Bombardier Michael O'Donnell, 22, a brash Irish-American from Boston, whose steady hands belied his frenetic personality. Radio operator Frank Moretti, 24, a former radio repair shop owner from New Jersey who could disassemble and reassemble a transmitter blindfolded. Top turret gunner and flight engineer George Thompson, 26, the oldest of the enlisted men. A former auto mechanic from Detroit who understood the B-17's 4 Wright Cyclone engines better than the men who built them. Ball turret gunner Elmer Davis, 21, 5'5", and perfectly sized for the cramped spherical turret that would be his battle station. Waist gunners Henry Jackson and Peter Novak, both 23 former high school football teammates from Pennsylvania coal country. Tail gunner Charlie Reynolds, 20, the youngest crew member, a soft-spoken farm boy from Nebraska who had never fired a gun before joining the Army Air Forces. "Gentlemen," Harrington said, turning to face them, "meet Lady Luck. She's going to take us to Germany and bring us home again, 25 times." None of them fully grasped the audacity of that statement. The concept of 25 missions as a complete tour had been established just months earlier. Few crews had achieved it. Most never would. What separated the men who survived from those who didn't? Was it truly luck, as their aircraft's name suggested? Was it skill? Or was it some combination of factors that no one had yet identified? The answers would reveal themselves one mission at a time, one narrow escape after another, as these 10 men defied the mathematics of aerial warfare. January 15th, 1943. Grafton Underwood, England. The 384th Bomb Group's briefing room hummed with tension as the green curtain was pulled back, revealing the target map. A collective groan rose from the assembled air crews as red yarn stretched from their base in England across the North Sea to the German port city of Wilhelmshaven. "Gentlemen, this is it," Colonel James Howard announced. "First combat mission for most of you. The target is the submarine pens at Wilhelmshaven. Intelligence reports heavy flak concentrations and fighter opposition." In the third row, Harrington felt Sullivan tense beside him. They had arrived in England just 2 weeks earlier after an arduous journey across the Atlantic, island hopping from Newfoundland to Greenland to Iceland, before finally reaching Scotland. Training had continued at a frantic pace. Formation flying, gunnery practice, emergency procedures, but nothing could fully prepare them for what awaited over enemy territory. "Lady Luck will fly in the low squadron, number 4 position," the operations officer announced, placing their aircraft in one of the most vulnerable spots in the formation. The mathematics of formation flying were precise and unforgiving. Each B-17 maintained a specific position relative to the others, creating a defensive box of overlapping, all-caliber machine gun fields of fire. The lead aircraft determined the course, speed, and bombing run. Deviations could be fatal, creating gaps that German fighters would exploit mercilessly. "Questions?" Colonel Howard asked, scanning the room. When none came, he nodded grimly. "Takeoff at 700. Dismissed." As the crews filed out toward the mess hall for their pre-mission breakfast of powdered eggs and bacon, Harrington pulled his navigator and bombardier aside. "Jack, double-check your charts. I want alternative routes plotted in case we get separated from the formation." Wilson nodded, already mentally calculating headings and checkpoints. "Mike, what about the bomb site?" Harrington continued, turning to O'Donnell. "Calibrated yesterday," the bombardier replied. "I've studied the target photos until I could recognize those sub-pens in my sleep." What none of them mentioned was the statistic that hung over the briefing room like a shroud. First missions claimed more crews than any other. Men who had never experienced combat, flying aircraft they were still learning to master, facing an enemy who had been fighting for years. The mathematics were brutal. Nearly 15% of crews failed to return from their first combat mission. As they walked toward the flight line in the pre-dawn darkness, the ground crew was already preparing Lady Luck, loading 6,000 pounds of bombs into her bay, filling her tanks with 2,780 gallons of high-octane fuel, and arming her 13 caliber machine guns with 11,000 rounds of ammunition. "Think we'll see any fighters?" Davis asked as they approached, his voice betraying a mixture of fear and excitement. "Count on it," Thompson replied, the top turret gunner's voice grim. Just remember your training. Short bursts. Lead your target. Don't waste ammunition. What Thompson didn't say, what the instructors back in the States had emphasized repeatedly, was that the average life expectancy of a ball turret gunner in combat was just 12 minutes. Davis's position, hanging beneath the aircraft in a plexiglass bubble, was simultaneously the most vulnerable and most critical defensive position on the B-17. At 06:45, the crew climbed aboard through the small entry door behind the right wing. Each man moved to his station with practiced efficiency. Harrington and Sullivan in the cockpit, running through the pre-flight checklist. Wilson at his navigator's table behind them. O'Donnell in the plexiglass nose. Moretti at his radio station. Thompson in the top turret behind the cockpit. Davis squeezed into the ball turret, which would be lowered into position after takeoff. Jackson and Novak took their positions at the waist guns. Reynolds crawled into the narrow tail position, where he would spend the mission lying prone behind his twin, Fitches. At precisely 0700, the first B-17s began thundering down the runway. Lady Luck was 20th in line for takeoff, each Fortress launching at precisely 1-minute intervals. The mathematics of the launch sequence were as precise as everything else in bomber operations. Too close together, and aircraft risked collision in the gathering clouds. Too far apart, and the formation would take too long to assemble, wasting precious fuel needed for the journey to the target and back. As Harrington advanced the throttles, the 4 Wright Cyclone engines roared to full power, vibrating through the airframe as the heavily loaded bomber began rolling down the runway. At 115 miles per hour, he eased back on the yoke, and Lady Luck reluctantly lifted into the gray English sky. What awaited them over Germany would test every ounce of their training, every fraction of their luck, and forge the first link in a chain of survival that would ultimately stretch across 25 missions when most crews never saw 10. January 15th, 1943. North Sea approaching the German coast. The temperature inside Lady Luck dropped precipitously as they climbed to 25,000 feet. Ice formed on the inside of the metal fuselage. Breath crystallized instantly. The gunners struggled to keep their hands warm enough to operate their weapons while wearing the bulky, electrical heated suits that barely functioned. 10 minutes to German coast. Wilson's voice crackled over the intercom. Enemy fighters reported in the vicinity. Harrington scanned the formation around them. 38 B-17s flew in precise combat boxes, their contrails etching white lines across the stratosphere. The mathematics of the formation placed each aircraft 100 feet from its neighbors, close enough for overlapping fields of fire, but far enough to avoid collision in turbulence. Bandits, 3 o'clock high, Reynolds called from the tail position. Me-109s, about 20 of them. The Messerschmitts dove through the formation with practiced precision, their 20mm cannons flashing. 2 B-17s in the high squadron erupted in flames almost immediately. Harrington watched in horror as one broke apart, its wings separating completely before the fuel tanks exploded. No parachutes emerged from the fireball. Stay tight, everyone, Harrington ordered as the German fighters regrouped for another pass. Call out targets clearly. Gunners, wait until they're in range. The mathematics of aerial gunnery were complex calculations of speed, distance, and deflection. A fighter approaching at 300 mph required the gunner to aim not where the enemy was, but where it would be when the bullets arrived. Most gunners received just 6 weeks of training before deployment. The German pilots they faced had been flying combat missions for years. The ball turret beneath the aircraft rotated as Davis tracked an approaching fighter. Ball to pilot. His voice crackled through the intercom. 109 coming straight up from below. "I see him," Harrington acknowledged, unable to do anything but maintain formation as the German fighter grew larger in Davis's sights. The Messerschmitt pilot had chosen his approach carefully, coming from the most vulnerable angle, where only the ball turret guns could bear. At 400 yards, Davis opened fire, the .50 caliber Brownings hammering in his ears. Tracers reached out toward the approaching fighter, which seemed to fly straight into the stream of bullets. The 109's cockpit shattered, and the aircraft rolled inverted before plummeting toward the sea 25,000 feet below. "Got him!" Davis exclaimed, his voice betraying both relief and shock at having taken a human life. "Good shooting, Elmer," Harrington replied, his eyes never leaving the formation lead. "Stay sharp. There'll be more." What none of them realized in that moment was that Davis had just demonstrated an extraordinary talent for aerial gunnery that would serve them through 25 missions. His instinctive understanding of deflection shooting, leading a target moving in 3 dimensions at hundreds of miles per hour, was a skill that couldn't be taught. You either had it or you didn't. Davis had it. As they crossed the German coastline, the flak began. Black puffs of smoke erupted around the formation as German 88mm anti-aircraft guns found their range. Each explosion sent jagged fragments of steel in all directions. The mathematics of flak were purely statistical. The German gunners couldn't target individual aircraft with precision, but they could fill a volume of sky with enough exploding shells that bombers flying through it would almost certainly be hit. Lady Luck shuddered as fragments struck her aluminum skin. A piece the size of a man's fist punched through the right wing, narrowly missing the fuel tanks. Another tore through the fuselage between the waist gunners, missing both men by inches. "Damage report," Harrington called over the intercom. "Right wing hit. No serious damage," Thompson reported after checking the engines. "Hole in the fuselage, but we're okay," Jackson added from the waist position. They continued through the flak field for 12 agonizing minutes before the target appeared below. The massive concrete submarine pens of Wilhelmshaven, where Nazi U-boats were serviced between Atlantic patrols. "Bombardier, your aircraft," Harrington said, transferring control to O'Donnell for the bomb run. "Roger, pilot. I have the aircraft," O'Donnell replied, his voice steady as he peered through the Norden bomb sight. The complex analog computer would calculate the precise moment to release their payload, accounting for airspeed, altitude, wind drift, and the ballistic trajectory of the bombs themselves. For the next 3 minutes, Lady Luck flew straight and level through the most intense flak yet. No evasive action was possible during the bomb run. The mathematics of precision bombing required absolute stability. Any deviation would send the bombs off target, making the entire mission and the lives already lost meaningless. "Bombs away," O'Donnell called as 6 1,000-pound demolition bombs fell from the aircraft. The sudden weight reduction caused the B-17 to lurch upward. "Let's get the hell out of here." "My aircraft," Harrington responded, banking sharply to follow the formation as it turned for home. Below them, explosions bloomed across the target area as nearly 200 tons of bombs found their mark. But the mission was far from over. The most dangerous part still lay ahead, the long journey home with damaged aircraft and depleted ammunition through enemy airspace where fresh fighters waited. What the crew of Lady Luck didn't know was that their first mission would establish a pattern that would repeat throughout their tour. Their position in the formation, Davis's extraordinary gunnery skills, O'Donnell's precision with the bomb sight, and Harrington's steady hand on the controls, these factors would combine time after time to bring them home when other aircraft fell from the sky around them. The mathematics of survival were beginning to take shape, one mission at a time. February 26, 1943. Bremen, Germany. Their fifth mission. The flak over the target was the worst they had seen yet. The German 80mm batteries had zeroed in on the formation with terrifying accuracy. "They've got our altitude exact," Sullivan muttered as black explosions blossomed around them. A sudden violent concussion rocked the aircraft. The control yoke jerked in Harrington's hands as shrapnel tore through the right aileron. Simultaneously, the No. 3 engine began streaming oil, its temperature gauge climbing rapidly into the red. "Feather No. 3, Harrington ordered, fighting to maintain position in the formation. Thompson reacted instantly, pulling the feathering control that turned the propeller blades edge-on to the airflow, reducing drag and preventing the engine from tearing itself apart. The sudden, asymmetric thrust pushed the bomber to the right, requiring Harrington to apply constant left rudder pressure to maintain course. "We're dropping back," Sullivan warned as their airspeed decreased. Flying on 3 engines, the heavily loaded B-17 couldn't maintain formation speed. The mathematics of engine loss were brutally simple. Each B-17 engine produced 1,200 horsepower. Lose one, and performance dropped by 25%. Maintaining altitude became difficult. Keeping up with the formation became nearly impossible. And a lone B-17, separated from the protective firepower of the formation, became easy prey for German fighters. "Navigator, give me a heading for home," Harrington ordered, making the difficult decision to leave the formation. "Heading 290, Lieutenant," Wilson responded promptly. 450 miles to England. As Lady Luck fell back from the protection of the formation, the German fighters noticed immediately. 2 Focke-Wulf 190s peeled away from the main attack and turned toward the struggling bomber. "Fighters, 7 o'clock high," Reynolds called from the tail position. "Coming in fast." The FW-190s approached from behind and above, the deadliest attack angle against a B-17. The tail gunners' field of fire was limited, and the waist gunners couldn't bring their weapons to bear until the fighters had already made their pass. Reynolds opened fire with his twin, B-17s, but the fighters were moving too fast. They flashed past on either side of the bomber, their 20mm cannons ripping into the aluminum skin. The left waist gunner, Jackson, screamed as a cannon shell exploded near his position, peppering his left side with fragments. "Jackson's hit," Novak called over the intercom, dropping his own gun to attend to his wounded crewmate. "How bad?" Harrington asked, unable to leave the controls. "Not too deep," Novak reported after a quick assessment. "Lot of blood, but no arterial damage. I'm patching him up." The FW-90s climbed away to set up another attack run. Harrington knew they wouldn't survive many more passes. "Everyone listen up," he said into the intercom. "We're going down to the deck. Our only chance is to get below their radar coverage." The mathematics of evasion were clear. At 25,000 feet, they were visible to every German radar station for 100 miles. At treetop level, the curvature of the Earth would hide them from distant observers. The trade-off was fuel efficiency. Aircraft burned significantly more fuel at lower altitudes, where the air was denser. Harrington pushed the yoke forward, and Lady Luck began a controlled descent. The 3 functioning engines strained as the airspeed built rapidly. 250 map, to 300. The airframe began to vibrate as they approached the B-17's maximum speed. "They're coming around again," Reynolds warned. "Hold on," Harrington called as he threw the bomber into a steep diving turn, a maneuver the B-17 was never designed to perform. The German pilots, expecting the damaged bomber to continue straight ahead, overshot their attack run. By the time they recovered, Lady Luck had dropped below 10,000 feet and was still descending. We've got clouds at about 3,000 feet, Sullivan noted, pointing to the layer of stratus ahead. That's our salvation, Harrington replied, aiming for the grayish mass. The bomber plunged into the cloud layer, and suddenly they were flying blind. Harrington switched to instruments, keeping the aircraft level as they continued westward at just 200 feet above the German countryside. Any sign of pursuit? He asked after several minutes. Negative, Reynolds reported from the tail. I think we lost them in the clouds. The immediate danger had passed, but they still faced a daunting challenge. Crossing 400 miles of enemy territory in the North Sea on 3 engines, with limited fuel and a wounded crewman. What none of them realized at that moment was that this mission would become the template for their survival strategy. While other crews stubbornly remained in formation even with crippled aircraft, often with fatal results. Harrington had made the difficult but correct decision to separate and find an alternative route home. It was a lesson they would apply repeatedly in the missions to come. The mathematics of survival sometimes meant breaking formation, flying alone, and using clouds, terrain, and unpredictable routing to evade enemy fighters. It was a calculated risk, but one that would ultimately contribute to their improbable survival record. How's the fuel? Harrington asked Thompson after they had been flying at low altitude for nearly an hour. Critical in the right tanks, the flight engineer reported. I'm transferring what I can to balance the load, but we're burning more than calculated with the 3-engine configuration. The mathematics of fuel consumption were unforgiving. At low altitude, each engine consumed nearly 75 gallons per hour. With 1 engine out and flying through denser air, the remaining 3 were working harder than normal, increasing consumption further. Their margin for error was vanishing with each passing minute. Navigator, any updates? Harrington asked. We're approximately 180 miles from the English coast, Wilson replied. At current speed and heading, we should reach it in about 50 minutes. If the fuel holds, Sullivan added quietly. As they approached the North Sea, Harrington made another crucial decision. Rather than climbing back to a safer altitude for the water crossing, they would remain at wave-top height. The strategy reduced their visibility to German coastal radar, but increased the risk of disorientation and collision with the water. Everyone keep your eyes open, he instructed. Watch for ships below, both ours and theirs. The gray waters of the North Sea stretched before them, indistinguishable from the gray sky above. The horizon disappeared completely, creating a disorienting Ganzfeld effect that had claimed many pilots who inadvertently flew into the water while believing they were straight and level. Harrington focused intently on his instruments, trusting the artificial horizon when his natural senses tried to deceive him. The altimeter showed just 100 feet above the waves, close enough to stay beneath radar, but high enough to avoid disaster if they hit unexpected turbulence. After 30 tense minutes over water, Thompson's voice broke the silence. Fuel critically low in all tanks, 10 minutes remaining at current consumption. The mathematics were clear and merciless. They were still 20 minutes from the English coast. Reduce power, Harrington ordered. Minimum airspeed to maintain altitude. The engines throttled back, and their airspeed dropped to just 140 mph, barely above stall speed for the heavy bomber. Any unexpected downdraft could plunge them into the North Sea. There, Sullivan suddenly exclaimed, pointing ahead. Ships! A convoy of vessels appeared through the mist, moving in the same direction they were flying. British markings, Sullivan confirmed after they drew closer. Coastal convoy. The presence of British ships meant they were in the shipping lanes approaching England, and more importantly, within range of air-sea rescue if they didn't make the coast. Radio, send emergency signal, Harrington ordered. Our position and fuel status. Moretti quickly tapped out the message in Morse code, then switched to voice transmission on the emergency frequency. Any station, any station. This is bottleneck 2-4, B-17 on 3 engines, critical fuel, position approximately 40 miles east of Norfolk coast. Request vectors and emergency landing options. After several tense moments, the radio crackled to life. Bottleneck 2-4, this is Coltishall Tower. We have you on radar bearing 270 degrees. Divert immediately to our field. Runway heading 240, no traffic, emergency equipment standing by. RAF Coltishall was not their home base, but it was the closest airfield to their position and their only hope of reaching land before the fuel ran out. Roger, Coltishall, Moretti replied. Diverting to your field. 3 engines, 1 wounded aboard. 10 minutes later, the English coastline appeared through the mist. 5 minutes after that, the number 1 engine sputtered and died as its fuel tank ran dry. Feather number 1, Harrington ordered calmly, though there was nothing calm about flying a B-17 on just 2 engines. The mathematics of 2-engine flight in a B-17 were simple. It wasn't supposed to be possible. The aircraft was designed to fly on a minimum of 3 engines. With just 2, both on the same wing, the asymmetric thrust made control nearly impossible. Harrington fought the controls as the bomber tried to turn left into the dead engines. Sullivan added his strength to the control yoke, and together they kept the aircraft level as the airfield appeared ahead. Gear down, Harrington ordered as they approached the runway. Negative on gear, Thompson replied after checking the hydraulic pressure. System pressure 0. Flak damage to the lines. Without hydraulics, they had no landing gear, no flakes, and limited brake pressure. They would have to belly land the giant bomber. Crew, prepare for crash landing, Harrington announced. Gunners, get to crash positions in the radio room. Brace yourselves. As they lined up with the runway, the second engine began to sputter. They were literally gliding in on fumes. Cut all switches on my command, Harrington instructed. Fuel valves closed. Battery off last. At 50 feet above the runway, he gave the order. All electrical systems went dead as Thompson flipped the master switch. The propellers windmilled to a stop as the last drops of fuel were exhausted. In eerie silence, the B-17 descended toward the concrete runway. Harrington held the nose up as long as possible, bleeding off speed. At the last moment, he leveled the wings perfectly, and the bomber settled onto its belly with a shower of sparks and the screech of tearing metal. The aircraft slid 200 feet down the runway before coming to a stop, leaving a trail of aluminum debris behind it. Remarkably, the fuselage remained intact. Everyone out, Harrington ordered as soon as they stopped moving. Fire risk. The crew evacuated through the main door and emergency hatches as RAF fire crews raced toward the downed bomber. Jackson, the wounded waist gunner, was carried out by Novak and Thompson. Standing on English soil, watching foam being sprayed on their aircraft's engines as a precaution, the crew of Lady Luck realized they had survived against overwhelming odds. 1 engine lost to flak, 2 more to fuel starvation, enemy fighter attacks, a wounded crewman, a belly landing at an unfamiliar field. The mathematics of probability suggested they should have been another statistic, one of the approximately 40% of damaged bombers that never made it back to England. Instead, they had survived their 5th mission through a combination of skill, decision-making, and the intangible factor that gave their aircraft its name: luck. What they didn't know was that this mission, this demonstration of their ability to overcome catastrophic damage and return against the odds, would be repeated in various forms throughout their tour. While other crews fell from the sky around them, Lady Luck would continue to bring her crew home, mission after mission, defying the mathematics of bomber warfare. Their survival wasn't just luck, though. It was Harrington's willingness to make difficult decisions. It was Thompson's intimate knowledge of the B-17 systems. It was Wilson's precise navigation. It was every crew member performing their role to perfection under the most extreme pressure imaginable. As a medical officer examined Jackson's wounds, declaring them nasty but not life-threatening, Harrington gathered his exhausted crew. "Good work, everyone," he said simply. "We'll get patched up and head home tomorrow." 5 missions down, 20 to go. The odds were still heavily against them, but they had survived the day when many hadn't. In the brutal mathematics of bomber warfare, that was all that mattered. April 17th, 1943. Bremen, Germany, their 11th mission. The target was the Focke-Wulf aircraft factory on the outskirts of the city. Intelligence had warned of heavy defenses, both flak and fighters, protecting the facility that produced the FW-190, one of the Luftwaffe's most formidable fighters. Lady Luck flew in the lead squadron, having been moved up from their usual position after Harrington had demonstrated exceptional formation flying skills in previous missions. The promotion was both an honor and a death sentence. Lead squadrons faced the most concentrated defensive fire. "Fighters at 9 o'clock, called Reynolds from the tail. Me-109s, at least a dozen. The German fighters approached in a disciplined formation, then split into pairs for coordinated attacks from multiple angles. The mathematics of fighter tactics had evolved over 3 years of war. The early wild individual attacks had given way to methodical, rehearsed patterns designed to overwhelm bomber defenses. Davis rotated his ball turret to track a pair approaching from below. The Oklahoma farm boy had become one of the most effective gunners in the group, with 7 confirmed kills already to his credit. His understanding of deflection shooting, leading a target moving in 3 dimensions, was almost supernatural. "Ball to crew," his voice cracked over the intercom. 2 109s coming up from 5 o'clock low. The lead Messerschmitt opened fire at 400 yards, yellow tracers reaching for the bomber's vulnerable belly. Davis waited, tracking the fighter through his reflector sight. At 300 yards, he squeezed the trigger. The twin. Van Calibers hammered in his ears as a stream of tracers connected with the German aircraft. The fighter's cockpit shattered, and it rolled inverted before plummeting toward the earth. The second Messerschmitt broke off its attack, diving away to safety. "1 confirmed," Davis reported calmly, already scanning for the next threat. Across the formation, other B-17s weren't faring as well. 3 had already fallen out of the sky, trailing smoke and flames. The mathematics of attrition were working with ruthless efficiency. Each mission claimed approximately 5% of the attacking force. Over a 25-mission tour, the cumulative probability approached certainty. As they neared the target, the flak intensified. Black puffs of smoke filled the sky around them, each containing thousands of jagged metal fragments moving at supersonic speed. The German gunners had the altitude dialed in precisely. The shells were exploding at exactly 25,000 feet, where the formation was flying. "Flak at 12 o'clock, Sullivan warned unnecessarily as the black clouds appeared directly ahead. "No choice but to fly through it," Harrington replied grimly. "Bombardier, you ready?" "Ready, Lieutenant," O'Donnell confirmed from the nose position. "I have the target in sight." "Your aircraft," Harrington said, transferring control for the bomb run. For the next 3 minutes, Lady Luck flew straight and level through the most intense flak barrage they had yet encountered. The mathematics of precision bombing required absolute stability during the approach. Any evasive action would throw off the complex calculations of the Norden bomb site. The aircraft shuddered repeatedly as fragments struck the wings and fuselage. A piece the size of a dinner plate tore through the right wing, missing the fuel tanks by inches. Another punched through the floor of the radio compartment, narrowly missing Moretti. "Bombs away," O'Donnell called as 8 500-pound demolition bombs fell from the aircraft. The sudden weight reduction caused the bomber to lurch upward. "My aircraft," Harrington responded, banking sharply to follow the formation as it turned for home. But the mission was far from over. As they cleared the target area, a new threat appeared. Ahead of the formation, contrails marked the approach of a full group of Messerschmitt Bf-110 heavy fighters. "Head-on attack," Thompson called from the top turret. The German fighters had adopted a new tactic, approaching from the front, where the B-17's defensive firepower was weakest. Only the bombardier's single. Vonder's caliber and the navigator's handheld weapon could fire directly forward. "Everyone hold tight," Harrington ordered as the fighters grew rapidly larger in the windscreen. The mathematics of a head-on pass were terrifying. The combined closing speed approached 600 mph. The fighters would be in effective range for less than 5 seconds. But those 5 seconds could be fatal. O'Donnell opened fire with his nose gun, the tracers reaching out toward the approaching fighters. In the navigator's compartment, Wilson fired his flexible Matos caliber through the side window. The German pilots held their course, their own 20mm cannons flashing. The lead Bf-110 and Lady Luck converged at a combined speed of nearly 200 feet per second. Cannon shells ripped through the bomber's nose, shattering the plexiglass and tearing into the instrument panel. The control cables to the rudder were severed, and the left aileron was damaged. "I'm hit," O'Donnell called, his voice tight with pain. "Not bad arm only." Harrington fought to maintain control as the bomber wanted to roll left into the damaged aileron. The rudder pedals moved uselessly beneath his feet. "Thompson, damage report," he called as the formation began to pull away from them. "Left aileron damaged, rudder cables cut," the flight engineer reported after a quick assessment. "All engines still functioning, but we're losing hydraulic pressure." The mathematics of battle damage were accumulating. Each system had redundancies, but those redundancies were being exhausted one by one. Without rudder control, maintaining formation would be nearly impossible. "Navigator, give me a heading for home," Harrington ordered, making the difficult decision to leave the formation for the second time in their tour. "Heading 290, Lieutenant," Wilson responded. 380 miles to base. As they fell away from the protective firepower of the formation, Harrington knew they faced a dangerous journey home. A lone B-17, damaged and struggling, was prime prey for German fighters. "Everyone stay alert," he warned. "We're on our own now." What Harrington couldn't have known was that this mission would mark another critical point in their survival story. While other crews stubbornly tried to maintain formation with damaged aircraft, often with fatal results, Lady Luck would once again find salvation in separation. The mathematics of survival sometimes meant breaking from doctrine, making difficult decisions based on the specific circumstances rather than following standard procedures. It was a lesson Harrington had learned on their 5th mission, and one he applied without hesitation now. "Let's get down to the deck," he ordered. "Sullivan, help me with the controls. It's going to take both of us to fly this thing." The co-pilot nodded, gripping his control yoke. Together, they muscled the bomber into a controlled descent, fighting the aircraft's tendency to roll left due to the damaged aileron. "How's O'Donnell?" Harrington asked as they passed through 15,000 feet. "Flesh wound to the upper arm," Wilson reported from the nose compartment. "I've bandaged it. He'll be okay." At 10,000 feet, they leveled off temporarily, while Thompson and Moretti attempted to rig emergency control cables to the rudder. Using spare communication wiring and parts from the emergency kit, they managed to create a crude but functional connection that gave Harrington limited rudder control. "It's not pretty, but it should hold," Thompson reported. "Don't make any sharp turns." The makeshift repair was a testament to the crew's resourcefulness, another factor in their survival that set them apart from less fortunate bombers. The ability to improvise repairs in flight had saved countless aircraft that would otherwise have been abandoned. As they descended below the cloud layer at 3,000 feet, the German countryside spread out beneath them. Flying this low was dangerous. They were within range of even small arms fire from the ground, but it reduced the chance of interception by fighters. "Keep your eyes open for flak batteries," Harrington warned. "They'll have a point-blank shot at this altitude." For the next hour, they navigated by landmarks, following rivers and railway lines while avoiding towns and known military installations. Wilson's navigation skills proved invaluable as he guided them through unfamiliar territory without the benefit of radio beacons, which would have revealed their position to the enemy. The mathematics of low-level navigation were complex. Traditional methods relied on celestial fixes or radio bearings, neither of which was available to them now. Instead, Wilson used dead reckoning, calculating their position based on heading, airspeed, and elapsed time, while accounting for wind drift by observing ground features. As they approached the Dutch coast, Thompson reported another problem. Fuel consumption is higher than normal. The damage must have affected the lines, or one of the tanks is leaking. The mathematics of fuel management became their next challenge. At normal consumption rates, they had enough to reach England with a small reserve. But if they were losing fuel or burning at a higher rate due to the damage, they might not make it across the North Sea. "Options?" Harrington asked. "Sweden is neutral," Wilson suggested. "We could divert north. It's further, but we'd avoid German territory." "And be interned for the duration of the war," Sullivan added. "Switzerland is closer," Moretti offered. "Through the entire Reich and over the Alps with damaged controls?" "Not a chance," Harrington replied. The third option, the one no one mentioned, was attempting to land in occupied territory and become prisoners of war. The statistics on POW survival were reasonably good for airmen, but it would mean the end of their tour and years in captivity. "We press for England," Harrington decided. "Thompson, balance the fuel load to give us maximum range. Everyone else lighten the aircraft. Dump everything we don't absolutely need." The crew set to work, jettisoning ammunition, gun mounts, oxygen bottles, and anything else they could remove. Even with O'Donnell's wounded arm, he helped Wilson throw excess equipment through the camera hatch in the nose. The mathematics of weight reduction were significant. Every 100 pounds she'd increased their range by approximately 2 miles. By the time they reached the coast, they had lightened the aircraft by nearly 2,000 pounds. As they crossed into Dutch airspace, they encountered their first ground fire. Machine gun tracers reached up from a coastal defense position, falling short of the aircraft, but serving as a reminder of their vulnerability at low altitude. "Climbing to 1,000 feet for the water crossing," Harrington announced. "We need a margin for error over the sea." The North Sea stretched before them, a gray expanse that had claimed countless aircraft. Flying just 1,000 feet above the waves, they maintained radio silence to avoid detection. The tension in the aircraft was palpable as each man calculated the distance remaining against their dwindling fuel supply. After 40 minutes over water, Thompson's voice broke the silence. Fuel critically low, 15 minutes remaining at current consumption. The English coast was visible on the horizon, but still at least 20 minutes away at their current speed. Options? Harrington asked again. There's a Royal Navy destroyer about 10 miles to our north. Reynolds reported from the tail position, where he had been scanning the sea below. I can see the wake. Harrington made a quick decision. We'll ditch near the ship, radio, break silence, and send distress call with our position. Moretti transmitted the emergency message, and within minutes, the destroyer had altered course to intercept them. As they circled to approach downwind of the vessel, the number 4 engine sputtered and died. Feather number 4, Harrington ordered calmly. The mathematics of ditching a B-17 were not encouraging. The aircraft was not designed to land on water. Its low wing configuration meant it would likely cartwheel if one wingtip touched the water first. The survival rate for successful ditchings was approximately 50%. Crew, prepare for ditching, Harrington announced. Waist gunners, get the life rafts ready. Everyone in ditching positions. As they made their final approach, flying parallel to the destroyer's course about half a mile away, Harrington and Sullivan worked together to maintain perfect control of the damaged bomber. Their coordination had become seamless after hundreds of hours flying together. Cut all switches on my command, Harrington instructed as they descended to just 50 feet above the waves. Thompson, fuel valves closed. At the last possible moment, with the aircraft just above stall speed, Harrington leveled the wings and pulled the nose up slightly. Cut switches now. The aircraft settled onto the surface with a tremendous splash, the fuselage slapping against the water. For a moment, it seemed they had achieved a perfect ditching. Then the left wing dug into a wave and the bomber began to pivot violently. Get out! Get out now! Harrington shouted as water rushed in through the shattered nose. The crew evacuated through every available exit: the main door, the overhead hatches, the waist gun positions. Within 30 seconds, all 10 men were in the water, and within 2 minutes, they had inflated and boarded the life rafts. Lady Luck remained afloat for nearly 5 minutes before the water reached her wings and she slipped beneath the surface. The crew watched silently as their aircraft disappeared, taking with her all evidence of their 11th mission, except what they carried on their bodies. The destroyer reached them 20 minutes later, sailors helping the exhausted airmen aboard. Despite the damaged aircraft, despite O'Donnell's wound, despite ditching in the North Sea, all 10 crew members had survived. The mathematics of their survival continued to defy probability. While approximately 25% of crews forced to ditch at sea were lost, Lady Luck's crew had once again beaten the odds. As they sailed toward England aboard the destroyer, Harrington gathered his crew in the ship's mess. "We lost the aircraft, but we all made it," he said simply. "We'll get a replacement B-17 and continue our tour." 11 missions completed, 14 to go. The odds were still against them, but they had survived when others hadn't. In the brutal calculus of bomber warfare, that was all that mattered. What none of them realized was that the loss of Lady Luck would mark a turning point in their tour. Their replacement aircraft would carry them through the remaining missions and into the history books as one of the few crews to complete 25 missions with all members intact. The mathematics of survival were being rewritten, one mission at a time. July 26, 1943. Hamburg, Germany. Their 25th and final mission. The target was the submarine yards in Operation Gomorrah, the combined RAF and USAAF bombing campaign that would create the first firestorm in history. Their replacement aircraft, a B-17G they had named Lady Luck II, flew in the high squadron of the 384th Bomb Group. The new aircraft featured additional defensive armament, including a chin turret beneath the nose with twin caliber machine guns, a direct response to the head-on attacks that had nearly claimed them on their 11th mission. 20 minutes to target, Wilson reported from the navigator station. Harrington nodded, scanning the formation around them. 38 B-17s flew in tight formation, their contrails etching white lines across the stratosphere. After 24 missions, the sight still impressed him. Hundreds of tons of aircraft and explosives suspended 7 miles above the Earth, held aloft by nothing but the principles of aerodynamics and the skill of their pilots. "Everyone check in," he ordered over the intercom. "Co-pilot, okay," Sullivan responded. "Navigator, ready," from Wilson. "Bombardiers set," O'Donnell reported from the nose. "Radio operator standing by," Moretti acknowledged. "Top turret, all systems operational," Thompson confirmed. "Ball turret ready," Davis called from below. "Left waist, good to go," from Jackson, who had fully recovered from his wound. "Right waist ready," Novak added. "Tail gunner, clear back here." Reynolds completed the check. 10 men, each dependent on the others, each essential to the aircraft's survival. After 24 missions together, they functioned as a single organism. The mathematics of crew coordination had evolved from the formal procedures of their training to an almost telepathic awareness of each other's actions and needs. "Bandits at 2 o'clock high," Thompson called from the top turret. "Me-109s, about 15 of them." The German fighters dove through the sparse cloud cover, their tactics refined by years of combat. They approached in pairs, one drawing fire while the other attacked from a different angle. Davis tracked a pair approaching from below, his ball turret rotating smoothly. The farm boy from Oklahoma had become the most effective gunner in the group, with 12 confirmed kills to his credit. "Ball to crew?" His voice crackled over the intercom. 2 109s coming up from 4 o'clock low. The lead Messerschmitt opened fire at 400 yards. Yellow tracers reaching for the bomber's vulnerable belly. Davis waited, tracking the fighter through his reflector sight. At 300 yards, he squeezed the trigger. The twin. Hobbs calibers hammered as a stream of tracers connected with the German aircraft. The fighter's cockpit shattered, and it rolled inverted before plummeting toward the Earth. The second Messerschmitt broke off its attack, diving away to safety. "One confirmed," Davis reported calmly, already scanning for the next threat. The mathematics of aerial gunnery had become second nature to him. Lead the target by twice its apparent length. Adjust for the bomber's speed and altitude. Fire in short bursts to prevent overheating. The complex calculations happened instinctively now, without conscious thought. As they approached Hamburg, the flak intensified. Black puffs of smoke filled the sky around them, each containing thousands of jagged metal fragments. The German gunners had the altitude dialed in precisely. "Flak at 12 o'clock, Sullivan warned as the black clouds appeared ahead. "No choice but to fly through it," Harrington replied. "Bombardier, you ready?" "Ready, Lieutenant," O'Donnell confirmed. "I have the target in sight." "Your aircraft," Harrington said, transferring control for the bomb run. For the next 3 minutes, Lady Luck II flew straight and level through the intense flak barrage. The mathematics of precision bombing required absolute stability during the approach. Any evasive action would throw off the complex calculations of the Norden bomb site. The aircraft shuddered as fragments struck the wings and fuselage. A piece tore through the right wing, missing the fuel tanks by inches. Another punched through the radio compartment, narrowly missing Moretti. "Bombs away," O'Donnell called as 12 500-pound demolition bombs fell from the aircraft. The sudden weight reduction caused the bomber to lurch upward. "My aircraft," Harrington responded, banking sharply to follow the formation as it turned for home. As they cleared the target area, Harrington allowed himself a moment of hope. Their 25th mission was half complete. If they could make it back to England, they would have achieved what only a tiny percentage of bomber crews ever did: completing a full tour of duty. The mathematics of survival had been against them from the start. The average bomber crew in 1943 completed just 8 missions before being shot down. The probability of reaching 25 missions was less than 4%. Yet here they were, all 10 of them, still alive, still fighting, on the verge of beating those impossible odds. "Fighters at 9 o'clock, Reynolds called from the tail. "FW-190s, at least a dozen." The German fighters approached in a disciplined formation, then split into pairs for coordinated attacks. After years of combat, Luftwaffe tactics had evolved to maximize the effectiveness of their dwindling fighter force. Thompson swung his top turret to track the approaching threat. The auto mechanic from Detroit had developed into a precision gunner, with 9 confirmed kills. "Top turret to crew," his voice came over the intercom. 4 190s coming in from 9 o'clock level. The lead Focke-Wulf opened fire at 500 yards, its 20mm cannons flashing. Thompson waited until the range closed to 300 yards before responding. His twin. Excaliburs hammered as he tracked the fighter through its attack run. The German aircraft shuddered as bullets tore into its engine, black smoke pouring from the cowling as it broke away. "1 damaged," Thompson reported. The mathematics of combat attrition were working in both directions. While the 8th Air Force lost bombers on every mission, they were extracting a heavy toll on the Luftwaffe's fighter force. German pilots were flying 3 or 4 sorties per day, their skills deteriorating from exhaustion, their aircraft increasingly maintained by inexperienced ground crews as the Reich's manpower reserves dwindled. For the next hour, Lady Luck II fought its way back across Germany and the occupied territories. The formation lost 3 bombers to fighter attacks and 2 more to flak. But the remainder maintained their protective box, their combined firepower keeping the German fighters at a respectful distance. As they crossed the North Sea, the tension in the aircraft gradually eased. The probability of fighter attacks diminished with each mile they put between themselves and the continent. "Navigator, time to English coast?" Harrington asked. 25 minutes, Lieutenant," Wilson replied. "We're right on course." The mathematics of navigation had been Wilson's domain throughout their tour. Using his sextant, drift meter, and dead reckoning calculations, he had guided them to 25 targets and back, never missing a checkpoint by more than a few miles. An extraordinary feat in an era before electronic navigation aids. As the English coast appeared on the horizon, Harrington allowed himself to acknowledge what they were about to achieve. "Gentlemen," he said over the intercom, "we're almost home. 25th mission almost complete." A cheer went up from the crew positions, quickly followed by superstitious murmurs not to jinx their good fortune. The mathematics of probability had been against them from the start, but they had defied those odds through skill, teamwork, and the intangible factor that had given both their aircraft their names: luck. The final approach to Grafton Underwood was routine, the landing uneventful. As the wheels touched down on English soil, completing their 25th mission, the crew of Lady Luck II achieved what only a tiny fraction of bomber crews ever did: they survived their tour. As they taxied to their hard stand, they could see a crowd waiting for them. The ground crew, other air crews, the group commander, even the base chaplain. Word had spread that Harrington's crew was completing their tour, and everyone wanted to witness the moment. When the engines shut down and the propellers spun to a stop, the 10 men sat in silence for a long moment, each lost in his own thoughts. They had flown 165 combat hours together. They had dropped 60 tons of bombs on enemy targets. They had survived when hundreds of other crews had not. The mathematics of their achievement were staggering. Of the original crews that had arrived with them in January, less than 10% had completed their tours. The rest had been shot down, captured, killed, or wounded. The 384th Bomb Group had lost 159 aircraft in the 7 months they had been operational. Yet here they were, all 10 of them, alive and intact. Harrington was the first to move. "Let's go, gentlemen. They're waiting for us." As they climbed down from the aircraft, the waiting crowd erupted in cheers. Colonel Howard stepped forward to shake each man's hand. "Congratulations," he said to Harrington. "You've done what very few have managed. 25 missions, crew intact. It's almost unprecedented." The mathematics of their survival had defied all probability. But as they stood together beside Lady Luck Thescu, they knew it hadn't been just luck. It had been Harrington's decision-making, Thompson's mechanical expertise, Wilson's navigation, O'Donnell's bombing precision, Davis's extraordinary gunnery skills. Every man had contributed something essential to their collective survival. That evening, as they celebrated in the officers' club, Harrington gathered his crew around a table. "Gentlemen," he said, raising his glass, "we beat the odds. But more importantly, we did our job. 25 missions, 25 targets hit. That's what matters." The mathematics of strategic bombing were still being debated by the high command. How many bombers were required to destroy a target? How many crews would be lost in the process? How many replacement aircraft and men would be needed to sustain the campaign? But for the crew of Lady Luck II, the only mathematics that mattered were simple. 10 men, 25 missions, all survived. In the brutal arithmetic of bomber warfare, that was a miracle. Epilogue, September 3rd, 1945, Boston, Massachusetts. Thomas Harrington stood at his living room window, watching children play in the street below. The war had been over for less than a month. Japan had surrendered on August 14th, following the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On his mantelpiece sat a photograph. 10 men standing in front of a B-17, their faces young, serious, determined. After completing their tour, they had been separated. Harrington and Sullivan had become instructor pilots, training new crews in England. Wilson had joined the planning staff at 8th Air Force Headquarters. O'Donnell had flown a second tour as a lead bombardier. The enlisted men had followed different paths. Thompson had been commissioned as a maintenance officer. Davis had become a gunnery instructor, his natural talent put to use teaching others. Jackson, Novak, and Reynolds had all flown second tours with different crews. Moretti had been assigned to a radio intelligence unit. Remarkably, all 10 had survived the war. The mathematics of their collective survival defied all probability. Over 26,000 8th Air Force airmen had been killed during the war. Another 21,000 had become prisoners of war after their aircraft were shot down. Nearly 30,000 had been wounded. For all 10 members of a single crew to survive, the entire conflict was almost unprecedented. Harrington turned from the window as the doorbell rang. Opening the door, he found Davis standing on his porch, suitcase in hand. "Elmer, you made it," he exclaimed. embracing his former ball turret gunner. "Wouldn't miss it, Lieutenant," Davis replied with a grin. Or should I say, Captain now. Over the next few hours, the others arrived one by one. Sullivan drove up from New York. Wilson flew in from Chicago. O'Donnell simply walked over from his parents' house in the next neighborhood. Thompson arrived by train from Detroit. Jackson and Novak drove together from Pennsylvania. Reynolds came by bus from Nebraska. Moretti was the last to arrive, having driven up from New Jersey. For the first time since 1943, the entire crew of Lady Luck was together again. As they sat in Harrington's living room that evening, sharing stories and memories, the conversation inevitably turned to the question that had haunted all of them. Why had they survived when so many others hadn't? It was skill, Thompson insisted. We were better than the others. It was luck, O'Donnell countered. Pure, simple luck. It was both, Harrington said quietly. Skill gave us a chance. Luck determined the outcome. The mathematics of survival in bomber warfare had always been a complex equation of skill, equipment, tactics, and chance. No single factor could explain why one crew lived while another died. But sitting together in that living room, the 10 men who had defied those mathematics understood something that couldn't be quantified or calculated. They had survived because they had functioned not as 10 individuals, but as a single entity. Each man had placed the crew's survival above his own. Each had performed his role to perfection, trusting the others to do the same. In the brutal arithmetic of bomber warfare, that trust had made all the difference. As midnight approached, Harrington raised his glass for a toast. "To absent friends," he said solemnly, thinking of all the crews who hadn't returned. "To absent friends," the others echoed. The mathematics of loss were staggering. The 8th Air Force had suffered more than 47,000 casualties, with 26,000 killed. More than 5,000 aircraft had been lost. Entire squadrons had been wiped out, rebuilt, and wiped out again. Yet here they sat, all 10 of them, alive and whole. As the evening wound down, Davis asked the question that had been on all their minds. "Do you think what we did made a difference? All those missions, all those bombs?" Harrington considered the question carefully before answering. The mathematicians at headquarters calculated that it took 108 B-17s dropping their bombs to ensure the destruction of a single German factory. That means thousands of men risking their lives to destroy one target. Was it worth it? I don't know. But I do know this. We did what our country asked of us. We flew 25 missions when most never saw 10. We hit our targets. We came home. In the end, that's all that matters. The mathematics of strategic bombing would be debated by historians for decades to come. The cost in aircraft, in men, in resources, the effectiveness of the campaign, the morality of bombing civilian areas. But for the crew of Lady Luck, the only mathematics that mattered were simple. 10 men, 25 missions, all survived. In the brutal arithmetic of bomber warfare, that was enough.